Please pause the video and take a moment to read this important safety message.
Hey, welcome back everybody. Here, part 8 in our KT88 single-ended amplifier build. And it is that time of year when it's gotten cold outside and winter is upon us. And in my basement I have a hot water boiler heating system, and it kicks on now that I've turned it on. And you may hear that in the background. There's not a lot I can do other than tell my wife to freeze to death to avoid that. So please forgive. Anyway, we are up to wiring up this potentiometer right here. It's 100K audio taper. In other words, that means it's not linear from end to end. And we're going to wire it up as per these instructions here. And if you'll notice, the way this is going to work is one end's going to go to the RCA input. So we're going to have to come back here on the back side of the amp and wire in one side of this. The other side of the pot, if you'll notice where it goes straight to ground, okay? So what we're going to do now at this point is we're going to take one set, the bottom set down here of these two, because keep in mind you got two potentiometers here. They're ganged, one on the front, one on the back. One will be left channel, one will be right. We're going to put one here and one here. We're basically going to tie these two together, to be honest, and we're going to bring them over right here to a ground point. That'll establish the ground for this, and then really all we have to do once we've got a ground point established is feed our RCA input into one side, and then we got to come off the wiper then and kind of go over to the 3K grid resistor and the 1 meg. Well, we've already got these wired up, so we just have to wire from the wiper over to a point that we've already got in the amplifier here. So I'm going to do that and then show you what I've done. Okay, you can kind of see I soldered the two down here together on one little wire, brought the wire down over and tied it into this ground point right here. Okay, up next what I've done here is I've connected the red and black leads of this multimeter with its own ohms range to the other end of this potentiometer, to the center tap, and the other end, not the part connected to ground. And what you want to make sure is that you've got low resistance here between the RCA input and what you're sending over here, in other words, the wiper. And as I turn the volume pot all the way to the right on the front of the amp, I'm down at 2.8 ohms. And as I turn it back to the left, it gets up into the 100K ohm range. But the reason you want to do that, because if you have high ohms here on where you're planning to wire the RCA input to the wiper, then you'd have it backwards. So when you turn your volume knob to the left, you would have lots of volume, and when you turn your volume knob to the right, you'd have little volume. But in this case, we've got it wired properly here so that all the way to the right between where I'm going to put the input, we've only got a few ohms of resistance there. So what we're going to do now is come from the input jacks, and I'm going to use R red for right, and that'll be these outputs over here, and white for left, which will be these. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring both of these over and around, and I'm going to tie them into the ground point. In other words, I'll ground the outer shield of these RCA jacks here on both of these. I'm going to bring them over and I'm going to tie them to the ground here on this little pot that I've established. And then the center wiper will end up going to these two inner parts here. And then we'll end up tying from this top end here down to the tie point here between the 3K and the 1 meg ohm resistor, which will be right here. But what we got to be careful of, I'm going to use some twisted pair wire that's shielded, so that what I'm carrying over the outer shield is ground. But what you're going to want to make sure you don't do is ground it over here on this side. So you're going to want to pick up your inputs. If you put an ohm meter between the outer ground part of this and the chassis here, you will have no connectivity. In other words, these spacers, nylon spacers here, are insulating these things from the chassis here. And you're only going to want to ground them over here at this one point right here, where I have then tied back over to these this ground point. Okay, you can see how I wired these up. Center conductor here to the center, the outer shield I brought over here and tied off. And the same on this one. And I'm not grounding these anywhere on this side. If you don't have some wire with shielded outer part like this or coax, I would recommend just twisting two wires together and using two different colors and kind of twisting them all the way around and bringing them over here and tying them off that way. All right, as you can see, we've got it wired up all the way around now. Coming off, coming around, I used some heat shrink along the way, got this routed to the corner. Got this whole pot wired up over here the way it should be, the two grounds going down to the bottom, the two inputs going to the top, and then the wiper here in the middle feeding over to these two tie points here that right here, which ultimately fits the grid stopper resistor into the tube. So at this point, we have this amplifier completely wired up. Having said that, I always do a couple things. One, I always kind of walk left to right all the way through the amp, just looking visually. I use my little chopstick poker here, and I poke solder joints just to make sure I don't have something loose anywhere that looks like maybe it's soldered, but ultimately it isn't. Because a lot of times, especially tying off on these terminal strips, it's kind of hard to see here. It's easy to forget to come and solder one of them. And once I do that, make sure all the solder is intact, then I will print out another copy of the schematic, and I will go through and I will do the little checkoffs again. I'm basically double checking everything to make sure that I haven't soldered something in the wrong place or connected something up wrong before I turn this on and potentially fry a component. So that's what we're going to do now, and then we'll bring it back around and put it on the variac and bring it up. Okay, at this point we've gone through the deep dive double check that I mentioned. Had two brand new in the box, the newer Gold Line KT88s, the Channel X. And so we've got this amp propped up. I've got it upside down, but you notice I propped it a little bit so that the tubes don't touch the table in any way, shape, or form. And you should be able to see here, let me get the camera just a little higher on the angle here. You should be able to see here, we've got our oscilloscope set up at this point. You can't see this, but right up here I've just got a jack going down to the inputs of the RCA inputs, and this is just a 1 kilohertz sine wave that I'm feeding into it right now. And over here is my variac that I can vary from 0 up to about 150 volts AC input right here. So let me slide in just a little bit here. You guys a little bit better view. Let's start bringing up the voltage on this unit. As you can see here, this little round dial meter kind of goes from 0 up to 150 volts, and this current meter here kind of reads what it's drawing. And right there I'm at about 50 volts. I'm just bringing it up slightly on a variac the way you would typically let's see if I can get it squared a little better here. Okay, continue to bring it up. That's about 65 volts right there. The outputs of this I have going up into my dummy load switch, into my speaker dummy load switch setup that ultimately feeds a set of clip speakers up here on top of the bench. Oh wow, listen, at 75 volts things are starting to warm up, and you can start to hear the sine wave a little bit, and you can start to see it a little bit here on the oscilloscope. It's probably pretty ugly here at 75 volts. That's about 85. That's up to about 100. I'm going to take it off of the speakers at this point and just look at pure dummy load. And you can see here, it's about as clean of a sine wave as I've ever seen. And we'll keep bringing it up till that's at 116 volts. That's at 120 volts right there. And you'll notice if I flip this off, you'll get tone on both sounds. You'll notice what the super clean. We're going to do much more bench testing. At this point, I'm just making sure the amp is working on both channels. That's left channel, that's right channel. Both channels are working, putting out beautiful sine wave at this point in time. All right, back over on the bench. I thought before I flipped it over, I would do some checking around voltage-wise. On top of that, I'd like to let it just run like this for 30 minutes while I can watch components. But interesting, a lot of people gave me grief over this capacitor. You know, we were coming off a B plus with 500 and some plus volts, 580 I think, with no load. And I told people that once we got this amp build and a load on it, this would come down and we wouldn't have to worry about this 500 volt cap. But you can see here right now 446 volts sitting on the plates. That's coming right off of the positive of this capacitor right here. So should be in good shape there. It's a 500 volt cap. Typically these things are a little overrated, and we're, as you can see, 50 volts or so below that. But I'm just going to go through now and keep checking the amp out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to label one of these, or label every point that I test in this amp, and then I can throw that up into I can put it on the schematic online, and I can throw it up for you guys to actually look at. So when you build your amp, you've got the something within a reasonable range. And I'll note that it's at 120 volts or whatever. I'm actually sitting at 119.2 volts right now on my AC. If I turn it up just a hair, that's 119.8, and you can see we got another 16 volts out of this unit here, or another 11 volts out of it, just by turning, you know, just fluctuations within your house at any given point in time. So stay tuned, and we're going to mark off some voltages. Okay, I thought you might find this of interest. Measuring here at pin 8 of the output tube, which is the cathode right here, and we're getting about 42 volts across it. And if you do 42 divided by this 500 ohm resistor, because that's the voltage across this from there to ground, 42 across that divided out, it's about 84 milliamps of current. A little more than I'd like to see. I'd like to see it down in the maybe 75 to 80 milliamps, but it's not crazy out of spec. We could always increase the value of these two 500 ohm resistors, raise them up to maybe 560 ohm resistors. That would lower the bias of the output tubes a little bit. The other thing I'm checking for is, you notice I'm measuring on both sides. So anytime I make a measurement, I do it on both sides of the amp, because you just never know when you maybe had an out of whack resistor or something. But you can see here I'm up in the very similar range here on the other side as well. Okay, now I'm measuring, what I'm measuring here is pin number 5, which is the grid, compared to the cathode, okay, because that's the actual bias of this amplifier here, would be the between the grid and the cathode. And if you'll notice, I'm at minus 41.2 volts here. So I'm going to make that note. And we're just moving along here. As you can see, I've now measured all the voltages here at the various places where the leads go into the transformer at the top. And I'm going to explain all this when we do our deep dive walkthrough, likely in our next video. And now I've kind of walked over here to the other side of this. I've got the 442. I've walked across this and got 229 volts right here on the plates of these of the 6M1P. And so what I'm starting to do is now just keep walking on down through this. Okay, we're driving this right now via the HP8903 audio analyzer, and we're driving it into the amplifier and then out of the amplifier basically into a dummy load. And I'm just taking percent distortion measurements over here. So I'm driving it right now 0.2 volts on the input. I'm at 0.2% distortion on this amplifier. On one channel, the other channel 0.19, so it's right there together. And what I'm going to do is just keep increasing it. 0.4 volts. As you can see, our sine wave goes up over here. 0.26, 0.6 volts. We're up to 0.3% distortion. By the way, anything below about 1% on a tube amp is really good. So when you're down in the 0.12345% distortion, you're in a really good place. Let's see, let's go down 0.7. Still down in the 3 to 0.8. By the way, line level's typically around 0.5, 0.55. So we're driving this thing way harder than line level at this point in time. I'm going to just keep driving it on up. 1.2 at 1.2 volts here. What I'm realizing is it does take a good bit to drive this amplifier. This single little 6M1P on the front here, it isn't a ton of gain. So you're going to need a preamp in front of this. If you're just trying to drive it from your little iPod or iPhone or whatnot, you get some volume out of it, but you're not going to get the full volume out of this thing. Amplitude 1.3 volts. Still nice clean sine wave. 1.4 volts. And we're still down below 0.5% distortion to 1.5 volts. Still looking good. 1.6. See right here? Starting to clip. I'm starting to flatline off the bottom over here, and you'll notice my distortion's climbing up still. So let's back off of the 1.6 to 1.55. At 1.55 we are still down at 0.5% distortion. I'll bring it down to amplitude 1.5. Okay, at 1.5, 0.497% distortion, 10.9. If you do the math on that real quick, 10.9 times 10.9 divided by 8, you're at 14.85 watts out. So this thing is clean as a whistle, pretty much till it starts doing a little bit of clipping at 14.85 watts out. So basically 15 watt out per channel amplifier here, single-ended.
Okay, at this point on my website, blueglow.net, under sketches and info, if you scroll down a little bit, will be the KT88 schematics. And I have now updated these with the actual voltages that I measured. If you'll notice down here on the right, it says approximate DC voltages in red measured at 120 volts AC input. Now, I will tell you, I'm running pretty hot up here on some of these voltages. And when I get to my tweaks video, we may decide we want to cool this thing off a little bit. But right now, I'm liking it. It's just as we get to swapping out, you notice here how all the different tube types this unit can run. Similarly over here, it's running great on these KT88s, but we might want to find a more balanced voltage level across the board here for some of these other tubes as well. But we'll do some homework on that. So anyway, this is posted up, as you can see here, version 5 up on our website at this point in time. So if you're building this, this will help you kind of figure out about where you should be with various voltages throughout the unit. I've got a couple more videos coming up in this series that I'm planning on. One of them is going to be some in-depth bench testing. So we'll do frequency sweeps, percent THD sweeps. We'll use the spectrum analyzer and kind of look at harmonics and whatnot. Just kind of blueprint this amplifier as a whole. That'll be a video in and of itself. Then I've got a video I want to do the walkthrough. So I'm going to walk you through this unit from one end to the other and kind of explain the design, kind of explain what each little component does and what its purpose is in this amplifier, so that you kind of not just learn how to build one, but you understand a little bit about what's behind it. I'll try to keep it at layman's terms and not get to where you have to have a degree in electrical engineering to understand it, but try to give you the gist of it all. And then the last video I plan to make on this are a bunch of tweaks. There are things that I kind of built this amp the way it was out on the the 20-some page Audio Karma thread. There's a lot of little things I would have done to it. Snubber caps, some poly caps across the filter caps. Just various little things that I would do different if this was an amp I was designing from scratch. Not to say that what I'm doing is any better. These are just typically tweaks you do after you get an amp working. And sometimes I like to build an amp without all those tweaks because it just adds complexity, kind of like this. And then once you know the amp's working well and fine, then you can come along and start adding these tweaks to it and start to realize, maybe this tweak or that tweak either helped it or hurt it. But if you don't have a good baseline to work off of, you really don't know at that point. So for all of you guys and gals that might have commented on my post, well, hey, I would have added this or I would have done that. We might get to some of those things you're talking about in the tweaks video. But having a heck of a lot of fun with this thing. Let's go back over there and listen to this thing a little bit and see what you think about the sound of it. Okay, just an impression or two about this amp. It is absolutely dead quiet on the input. And in between notes, it is like there is this blackness there that you're in this void of no sound whatsoever. It's quite amazing, to be honest. Thought maybe we might pick a song here, though, and let you hear it. And one thing I thought I'd show you, a lot of people, unless you want to put a bottom chassis cover on this, which you can, and Hammond sells a bottom cover for this, and you could bolt it on. But I typically don't on my amplifiers. It's just my personal thing. A lot of people will try to use these little sticky rubber feet, and they do not work out. Amps are way too heavy. They don't stick well to this powder coated finish. So what I do is I buy these little round things. You can get them at like your home improvement store. They're just little felt pads. And they're typically round, but I cut them into little square strips and I put them on here. And they don't roll off like these things do, these little rubber things. They just tend, you push the amp to the left and they roll right off, whereas this will let your amp slide, but yet keeps this from scratching your tabletop. And you kind of see what I'm talking about here. I used to be able to find this stuff in brown or black, and it worked out really well. But it's just little felt pads, and helps your amplifier slide around without scratching up the chassis. Okay, a song I put on my record label a few years ago that's now pretty much defunct because I don't have time for it, but here we go. Thanks for watching, everybody. Having a heck of a lot of fun with this thing. I am so happy with how this thing turns out. It's sounding amazing. I play that record and a few others over and over and over again as kind of my baseline songs. Sometimes I have to use songs off my own label so that I don't flag the YouTube police and they pull my songs and or demonetize me. So, at any rate, but I was just going to say, comparing this song over and over and over again on various amps, it's as good as I've ever heard it sound. So, stay tuned, more to come.